Good evening, everyone. My name is Norville Barrington. I serve as the chapter president of the Metro New York chapter of the National Black MBA, NY Black MBA. Welcome to NY Black MBA Beauty and Fashion with the Estee Lauder Companies. We are so proud to have the Estee Lauder Companies as our gold partner at NY Black MBA, exploring opportunities in career, lifestyle, thought leadership, and opportunities for professionals. You're going to hear from Akina, George, and Rene LaBorde shortly, two executives and young rising professionals at the Estee Lauder Companies. First, I also want to mention the Estee Lauder Companies will be at our career fair, which is going to be February the 15th, which is our premier virtual career fair. In addition to that, we're going to be the Estee Lauder Companies is going to be part of many other events that we're going to have coming forth, including our Black History Month Up Mixer, which is our special fashion show edition mixer sponsored by MAC Cosmetics, who will also be featured in our fashion show as well. That's the other companies will be also part of many other initiatives here with the National Black MBA Metro New York chapter. And again, I just want to especially just thank Caitlin, Christina, Brittany, Alex, Joanne, Matt, and the great team, Dora, and the great team at the Estee Lauder Companies for their many, many years of countless support, success, and ultimately bringing you opportunities in terms of career thought leadership perspective as well. So we're going to dive into our conversation today with the Estee Lauder Companies with Akina, George, and Rene LaBorde. First, I also want to mention that when we look at opportunities to Estee Lauder Companies, you also have to start off with how large the Estee Lauder Companies is. From a net sales perspective, they're about $16 billion. They're one of the world's largest leader manufacturers, marketers, and sellers of quality skincare, makeup, fragrance, hair products, and luxury prestigious brands globally. They sell products over approximately over 150 companies. And of course, some of the iconic brands, Hermes, the Estee Lauder, of course, Clinique, MAC, Origins, Tom Ford Beauty, Smashbox, Joe Malone, Bobby Brown, Bumble and Bumble, Lemire. I mean, it goes on and on. Glamlow. We can talk about all these great brands, Lab Series, all these great brands that we are familiar with. But I want to, and our goal here is to really give you some insight in terms of the nuts and bolts of the beauty and fashion industry. Oftentimes we focus on marketing, we focus on finance, but I also want you to focus on the opportunities from a supply chain perspective, from an engineering perspective. And as you're looking at your careers, our goal here is to provide you with some insight that will allow you to kind of go behind the scenes of some of the success of the Estee Lauder Companies. So first, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, which is Akina George. She's a senior manager of global policies and procedures, hailing from the vibrant island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Akina George is a first generation Vincentian American, bringing 2 decades of residency in a dynamic landscape of New York City with a foundation in dentistry and health service administration. She embarks on her journey with a seamless merging dental experience and administrative acumen. She's a graduate of New York City's College of Technology, where she ventured into intersection of healthcare and management. She also is in the medical device industry with a passion for quality assurance, leading and attaining certifications and regulatory affairs in Lean Six Sigma. In 2022, she also transitioned to become the senior manager of global policies and procedures at the esteemed Estee Lauder Companies. Beyond her professional accomplishments, the story is a tale of continuous improvement and perseverance. Akina is a advocate for youth empowerment. She's a catalyst for discussions and the impact of race and corporate spheres, and aspires to inspire others in sharing her journey. We'll bring her up shortly. One thing I want to note here is that when we look at careers and we look at the journey, this story and her background is very dynamic. And I'm looking forward to hearing from her and her journey to the Estee Lauder Companies. Alongside Miss George is Rene LaBorde, who's the Director of Global Industrial Engineering. He joined the Estee Lauder Companies in 2021 from Becker Dickinson, where he serves as optimizing continuous improvement and led their North American supply chain. Since joining the ELC, which is the Estee Lauder Companies, he's led engineering and infrastructure capital projects and the largest transformation innovation the ELC has ever undertaken across their global manufacturing sites. Rene has worked in supply chain in various industries, including CPG, uh, including Mars Wrigley Confectionery, which is the company that I interned at as well. Um, Medical devices, Becker Dickinson, the federal government at the United States Postal Service. He has led teams and initiatives in both manufacturing and distribution, as well as helping launch new products into the market, which is key for some of you who are looking to be entrepreneurs or some of you who are in marketing that launch products as well. He is talent. His talent and his passion for connecting people and creating spaces for community for people come together. He is on a committee, including the community engagement pillar for packaging engineering, culture team, and the community engagement chair for Noble, which is the network for Black leaders and executives at the Estee Lauder Companies. He also holds a degree in industrial engineering, which is a BS at Clemson University. Without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Akina, George, and Rene LaBorde to our stage here. So good afternoon to both of you. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Well, I mean, these backgrounds are dynamic and the journeys are different too, which is really important for those of you who are looking at your careers and looking at the journey. This is going to give you some great insight in terms of how these individuals not only succeeded in their career, but what got them to the Estee Lauder Companies. So first, I want to focus on you, Ms. George. So let's talk about some of your day-to-day responsibilities in your role. We talk about global policies and procedures, but what does that really entail?
Well, at Estee Lauder, we know that there are several sites, several different locations where we're manufacturing, we're distributing. It really, really varies. And so as the senior manager of the policies and procedures department, I am basically the one that is drafting, revising the foundation of all of the policies and procedures that we follow. So as you know, a policy would be something that is strictly followed throughout every single site, every single distribution center, third-party manufacturer. There are so many just different scopes within what the policies really touch. And then we go into procedures, which is like a little bit more step by step. Now, at each of these sites, we do have very local procedures as well. But because we are so large and we want to keep things connected, we don't want to create fragmentation. We want to make sure that no matter where we are, whether it's Indonesia or Paris, that same prestige quality is maintained. And so by causing us or creating those standard procedures, we can continue to do that throughout. So for my day-to-day, I'm simply going through all of our procedures, all of our policies, and I'm making sure that we're not only aligning with the instructions from the governing bodies, but we're aligning with the changes that are upcoming. We're aligning with the industry itself and how that is consistently evolving. And I'm making sure that not only, like I said, Paris or Milan or wherever it is that we're located or focusing on, that they're not only just, separated or divided, but they also are included and captured in everything. So that's my day-to-day, just making sure we're together.
and now, Ray, to you, in terms of your day-to-day, how does it differ from Akina's day-to-day?
Yeah, sure. So, Akina mentioned how we're located globally from a manufacturing standpoint. We've got manufacturing sites in, I think, 5-6 countries now. And so for me, my day-to-day kind of varies, right? And so where I'm less firefighting and more thinking strategically in the future. So everything from how are we improving our labor costs, for example, within our manufacturing sites, or new technology coming on from from a technology standpoint within our manufacturing sites? What does that mean from a capital standpoint, return on investment, kind of aligning our future ambitions, right? So if we're talking about like our 5-year, 10-year growth, what does that look like? Or even going into sustainability, what technologies and features do we need within our sites to accomplish those goals, right? So that's one part. So my playground is a bit in the manufacturing space within our supply chain. Everything from the technology and assets within our sites, all the way through to procedures. So, right. So I'm working on how do we improve our project management skill sets within our engineers throughout the globe. So as you can imagine, we have many different engineers working on many different projects to the tune of several hundreds of $1 million worth of capital each and every year, right? And so we have to make sure that we have kind of processes in place from a system standpoint, a stage gate standpoint, when you're talking about getting a project from ideation all the way to startup, right? So commissioning, validation, and startup from our technology standpoint. And then from a software standpoint, it's how do we gain the skill sets from a project management standpoint, but also from a continuous improvement standpoint, right? So what kind of tool sets from a Lean Six Sigma standpoint do we need to incorporate within our sites and the people within our manufacturing sites in order to achieve some of our goals, particularly our goals with value creation moving forward. And so I play a little bit of, jack of all trades, master of none kind of a position within Estee Lauder. And then any kind of, whether it's special projects that may pop up or PMOing large initiatives throughout our global supply chain.
So with that said, and this is, we were going over your background here. We saw that, you had a lot of experience in CPG, medical devices, and even shipping, right? So we talk about the U.S. Postal Service. So now how did that shape, how has your experience shape strategy for you, and especially now going into the beauty industry?
Yeah, so very good question. What kind of different industries and particularly the different roles I've had within those different industries, what it's allowed me to do is really see a supply chain from end to end, right? And so although, the beauty industry and the prestige industry differs obviously from medical devices and differs even more from confectionery, at the end of the day, when you're thinking about creating a product and putting it into a box, that part is all the same, right? It needs to be shipped with care throughout our supply chain. When you talk about processes from a manufacturing standpoint, Norville, you would know from your internship with Mars, processes within a manufacturing site are generally, the concept and logic is all the same, whether you're producing candy, medical devices, or prestige cosmetics, right? So what it's allowed me to do is when I think strategically or think about new initiatives moving forward, I try to identify what are potential pitfalls that might occur with whether it's launching a new product, launching new technology within a site. You run into the same issues, right? When you're talking about shipping from manufacturing to our distribution and distribution to customers, you're dealing with potential damages and how to reduce that. That's the same regardless if you're shipping candy bars or you're shipping prestige products. So it gives me insight into how do I address or identify potential pitfalls when a new initiative comes along, and how do we manage those risks, and how do we align on those risks and hold hand on accountability when we're looking to execute kind of large projects. So really just kind of gives me foresight into kind of the potential, like I said, pitfalls that may come in. It kind of eases that process because no project is perfect, no initiative is perfect. There's definitely peaks and valleys, right? And so how do we hold hands on the shared accountability, and how do we navigate those? And so that's my experiences have allowed me to be able to navigate those waters.
And you talk about high quality. You talk about working in these various industries. Akina, I know that in your career, I know I've seen it in my career, a matrix organization is very different, right, than most industries, right? Most organizational designs. So when we look at the Estee Lauder companies and we look at a matrix organization, how does the Estee Lauder companies really prioritize and ensure high quality across all this portfolio, especially as we look at it globally? Because I know that's a challenge.
It is. And that's why it is so important to make sure that there is thorough alignment throughout all of our sites with all of our suppliers, all of our manufacturers. And of course, going back to what I do on a daily with my policies and my procedures, If I am not going out, for example, and seeking, for example, we have Caesar coming up or Mocha with the Modernization Cosmetic Act. If I'm not going out and seeking that information, it becomes quite difficult for me to do my job successfully and ensure that we are all aligned. And so with something as far stretch as Estee Lauder, a company as far stretch as Estee Lauder, the foundation is most important. And it comes from, again, being aware of what's going on with those governing bodies and those regulatory bodies as well. So with that being the foundation, that's the first step, the first focus, always, always, always. And then it's about making sure that you have great communication. And it's also about building relationships with those individuals all over the world. You have to make sure that you're going towards the best of the best always. However, with the foundation set for us, it becomes a little easier to then say, okay, well, you know what? In China, they're making this change. And although it's not required here, because it is such a great change and it will make our product so much better, let's align everywhere. Just because it's the FDA only, we can go to Health Canada and say, okay, well, you guys only require this, but we're Estee Lauder and we're prestige. And so we want to make sure that we're not just saying, okay, well, we're going to just meet the requirements. We're saying, okay, what are the requirements here and here? Let's see how we can align and use the best of the best in terms of that foundation to get us to where we're looking to be.
So for those individuals, and I'll go back to you, Akina, regarding even from the entrepreneurship space, most of us have been in CPG or our entrepreneurs are creating new products. Mm-hmm. So is it that you are following regulatory or policies first from a government perspective, right? So just to clarify, you're leading with that first, and then Yes. You're keeping up with those trends. Okay.
Yes, but also we have to keep up with the trends of the consumer. We have to know, okay, well, right now, perhaps it's a little bit more in or trendy to be on the cleaner side of beauty. And so with that being said and that being understood, of course, again, we're paying attention to what our governing bodies are letting us, not get away with, but are instructing us to do. And then, of course, we're taking in what is required based on what the consumer is looking for as well. And we're just finding a happy harmony and a happy balance between the two. And again, that foundation of just making sure that we're aligned is also to make sure that we can be safe and produce things that will not be harmful to anyone in that industry or in that consumer market. And that's exactly why the FDA exists, for example. To give us that guideline. And so we take that very seriously at Estee Lauder in anything that we do. And of course, as mentioned, we are always paying attention to the consumer market. We wouldn't want to make something that no one is looking to buy. It would be a little counterintuitive. So we take in both aspects, absolutely.
Now, when we look at worldwide, Rene, I'm going to go to you. We look at this worldwide, and we're coming out of the pandemic, and we're talking about supply chain issues. So from a beauty perspective, how do you really make sure and how do you ensure that the supply chain stays resilient and manages its risks effectively? I mean, that goes to not only the beauty industry, but individuals who are entrepreneurs and are looking to procure, the right ingredients. So how do you, in your role, ensure that even with these disruptions, you're able to do that effectively?
Yeah. So I think that's something that is not unique to the beauty industry, right? So from a supply chain standpoint, you think agility, that's a buzzword for a lot of organizations. Some organizations do it better than others. But there's definitely learnings coming out of the pandemic, particularly from the beauty industry standpoint, where during the pandemic, people obviously weren't going out, right? So skincare was the kind of leading category, right? Folks still wanted to make sure that their skin was doing well, but perhaps from a makeup standpoint, not so much, right? Because we weren't going out. And so we saw demand for skincare products and production within our sites expand, right? Then as coming out of the pandemic, right? And so there were some investments that were made in order to try to catch up and build capacity from that standpoint, from a skincare standpoint, skincare production, sorry. Then as we were coming out of the pandemic, we saw kind of the business rebalance, or I should say the demand rebalance to more so on the makeup side. And so we obviously we were prepared for that because we were producing makeup from a skincare standpoint. We weren't ready for that kind of spike, right? And so what we've learned now coming out of the pandemic is how do we become more agile from a production standpoint? How do we multi-source from a production standpoint? And some of the challenges that come out of that are some of the obvious things, right? Technology that's similar across the sites. So that you can produce at multiple sites. However, there's a careful balance, right? Because if you're too agile, then that means you have to essentially overinvest in a lot of different sites, and you have to be good at everything at every site, right? And so that's not really feasible because that's a blank check idea, and obviously, most companies are not trying to do a blank check from a capital standpoint. But we need to understand how do we perhaps simplify from a supplier standpoint, or I should say from a packaging standpoint, right? How do we go from maybe 300 different types of bottles and cappers down to maybe 50, right? So now you're not, from an inventory standpoint, you're not holding so much supplies. And then from a simplification standpoint, technology, right? If you think about robots or machines that put caps on, right? Each of those machines have to have different cappers that can handle different sizes. So now you reduce the number of change parts you have, right? So there's a downstream effect both from an inventory standpoint, change over time standpoint. And so that's allowed us to really kind of reframe how do we think about that moving in the future, such that if there's another disruption such as that, how do we better position ourselves? So, right now we have a engineering technology center where we do a lot of innovation work. And so there we're playing around with different ideas on how do we manage our packaging a bit differently? How do we diversify our packaging sources for different suppliers as opposed to just using one or two suppliers, right? So now you're getting to kind of business continuity, which I think everyone's business continuity plans or lack thereof were tested during the pandemic, and ELC was no different. And so those were the kind of the learnings that came out of that. And so as we move forward, we need to be thinking a bit more agile on how we do everything from a manufacturing and distribution standpoint, but also from a supplier standpoint.
And for those of you in the audience here, we want to make sure that you were able to get your questions answered. So please use the chat feature. We want to hear from you. We want to hear some of your thoughts, questions you may have for the panelists. We definitely are going to allocate some time for that. Ms. George, let me also go back to you. And this is where collaboration across global bodies are very difficult. So how do you make sure it's aligned now? With all these changes, I've been through packaging changes. I've been able to commercialize and rationalize SKUs, packaging, labels across the world. But how from a regulatory perspective, right? Now, how does that impact what you do, and how do you make sure it's aligned across all of the industry in terms of all the standards?
So across all of Estee Lauder, we do have various regulatory affairs managers. And as soon as something new happens, some change happens, it's like the newest song or album at that point. Everyone is talking about it. Everyone is reaching out. Everyone's having several conversations about it. And it's no different here. Now, I may hear it and I'll say, you know what, let me go to my boss and say, you know what, Mokra is dropping soon. And we need someone that is well-versed in that regulatory sphere. So we'll bring in someone that is well-versed and already kind of associated or familiar with the processes for the FDA, for example. And we would then start the developing stages of how we would then integrate what we're currently doing with whatever those changes are. So again, right now we're working in Indonesia, where there is the new halal law that is coming out, where we're now, even though we're, I think about 2 years, because it's supposed to happen in about 2026, we're already starting to go through with a lot of the registrations, and we're going through with a lot of the testing and making sure that we are writing the policies and the procedures again to make sure that we can gain that halal certification, not just for Indonesia, but other, Islamic states. So again, we get in with those regulatory affairs professionals, and we're making sure that We build those partnerships and those relationships so that when it is time to make those changes, we're already way ahead and we're already started before these things actually come to fruition. So again, Caesar, as I mentioned, that's something that's been ongoing for a while. And we know that China does not play. And so we are always ready for them. Right now, we have gone through a massive overhaul of all of our documents and all of our processes to make sure that we are in alignment with them. So when we do have these audits, we can say, you know what, we were prepared for this from years ago because we've already contacted our regular affairs managers. We're already connected and we've already built those partnerships and relationships with those individuals to allow us to be well informed. And then that has now shaped the way that we are moving forward. So before we even cross the line, we're already sprinting.
So let me just throw a curveball at you. So now we look at it from a product development perspective. What are the 3 things you would recommend, especially when, and this is across the beauty industry, entrepreneurs that are looking to ultimately have their product be aligned across regulatory bodies? What are maybe 3 things that they should be looking at?
So I would say you need to know who your consumers are. You need to know what is required in that specific consumer market. If you're selling or you want to create a product that is for someone, a millennial, let's say, right? We need to understand, okay, what are they looking for? Are they going for something clean? Are they more into skincare, fragrance, whatever the case may be? That's the first thing that I say. We need to know who and identify who we're selling to, who these products are actually geared towards. Once we have that, it is very important, again, to go and look at those specific industries. So let's say you are going for just North America, for example. You want to make sure that you understand every single thing that is required for your product type to be saleable. Now, going back, and I know we're talking about cosmetics coming from dental/medical device industry. Before I got into any type of regulatory or quality work, I had to make sure that I could eat and sleep and still be able to speak about a 510K submission. I needed to know everything that was required for me to be able to submit that piece of document to the FDA and say, hey, this is what we're going to be selling. Yes, it is safe. And I have everything that you need to make sure that I can move forward with this. So that's the second thing. You need to make sure that you know, again, first, who you're selling to, and then where you're selling and what the requirements are for selling. The third thing, I would say you need patience. In the pandemic, I know many of us took on so many things where we're like, you know what, we're at home, or some people may have lost jobs and things like that. And we were trying to be creative and we're like, you know what, let me start that wig business or something, for example. And again, it's the same thing. You want to make sure that you are passionate and still patient with the growth of that, whatever it is that you want to invest your time in. Patience is absolutely, I feel like maybe I should take it to be number 1, actually. Number 1, patience. And then you need to know who you're selling to, where you're selling, and what's required where you're selling it.
And I appreciate that. This was important because, there's so many changes that are happening. And Mr. LaBorde, let me just ask you this, because now we're transitioning into, now how do you incorporate that into supply chain? How do you incorporate that into the challenges that it comes with? So when we look at it from internally, from Estee Lauder Companies, and ultimately just the industry itself, how do you make sure it's sustainable practices in your manufacturing? How is it sustainable in how you're developing? And I know I'm a big proponent of waste, not having waste, right? When you forecast, when you do your forecast, you got to reduce that waste to a certain percentage before your product is out somewhere where it doesn't need to be. So how do you ensure that in your role?
Good question. So we have publicly declared sustainability goals, right? And so, for example, with water reduction, we have a goal by 2025 to reduce water by 20%. Emissions, we have a goal of reducing emissions by 50% by 2030. And then from a packaging standpoint, we're looking to have our packaging mostly between 75 to 100% of our packaging be recyclable or sustainable materials, right? And so with those kind of changes or ambitions, I should say, how do we ensure from a supply chain and more particularly our manufacturing networks, what kind of technologies and new processes, right? And so, for example, within our sites in Long Island, from a water reduction standpoint, we have projects ongoing right now and several other sites as well, where we're including or putting in new technology from a water reduction standpoint, right? And so these are relatively large initiatives from a technology standpoint within our engineering manufacturing sites. And then from a packaging standpoint, right? When we talk about packaging development, our packaging development teams and R&D folks are developing these new packaging, right? So a lot of times those materials tend to be a bit different. So do we have the capability currently within our packaging equipment to handle that? And if not, what do we need to do in order to be able to handle that? And so, and what does that mean? Is that a replacement? Is that just a change parts? What's the return on investment there, right? And so those are the things that we're looking at from a sustainability standpoint. And then I think, what we've seen or what I've seen with projects in particular, and Akina brought up CSAR, which is new regulations coming out of China from a regulatory standpoint. But where that trickles down is within our manufacturing sites. Now we've got to revamp all of our manufacturing sites to essentially be, without getting too technical, clean rooms. So if you think when you're watching a TV show, if any of you have been in manufacturing sites in the food industry or microchip production, right? Those tend to be very clean environments. You think about like what I call the white ninja coats. So where we were currently at our sites, that wasn't the case, right? And so we've had to revamp all of our manufacturing sites all at the same time to hit this July 1st mark, which Akina is very well of that July 1st date that we were all racing to. And so essentially redesign our factories to have clean rooms and semi-clean rooms and separations for both material transfers and people transfers, right? So now you're trying to think on how do we essentially redesign our factories on the fly to accommodate these. You're talking about putting up brand new walls and HVAC systems and particle detection thresholds for dust and things of that nature, right? And so it's a very different way of thinking from a production standpoint within our supply chain. And so, as Akina mentioned before, now we're kind of stepping our game up from a quality standpoint, and now the China regulations in some cases surpass FDA. So it's why don't we raise the bar for all of our sites and have all of our sites be completely aligned from a production standpoint, a quality standpoint. And so that's where I've seen those changes kind of be enacted within our manufacturing sites.
And for those of you in the audience, when we look at the beauty industry, we're looking at anything that's being produced. You have manufacturer sites that are owned by companies, and then you have third-party sites. So what was mentioned here by Rene also factors into, especially if you're looking at third-party sites, there are ultimately regulatory policies that you have to abide by, and you have to know what's being produced on that line. What might be produced before your product is being created or being manufactured is something that may not work out well. So if you are if you're being produced from 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock, you got to make sure that before that, whatever product was produced before that has to be cleaned thoroughly, has to go through its proper changes. And this is why Estee Lauder Companies, and this is how I've grown up to know the Estee Lauder Companies as a top-notch supply chain organization, is the first thing that most individuals, most professionals learn about the Estee Lauder Companies. And that kind of segues in terms of core skills. Because when we look at core skills and we look at technology, and this goes for both of you, technology, data analytics are all part of transforming, the beauty industry. But ultimately, what are some of those things that have been leaned from your previous career? I'll start with you, Mrs. George, that you've then brought into your current role, and then what have you had to now adapt to as well from a continuing learning perspective?
Right. So I remember when I first started, anytime we did any type of training, for example, we had physical binders and physical documents that we printed and had individuals fill out for training effectivity. And we had folders for everyone. So anytime we were audited, we had to go into a filing cabinet and take the files out for the person that was trained or whoever is in question. So having that be something that is now digitized is the best thing. It is one of my favorite things thus far in my career, because that used to take forever. And of course, we still provide physical documents sometimes, depending on what's requested. But that has been the favorite innovation, and I'm thoroughly enjoying not having to stockpile files. In addition to that, for example, we can get into, for example, if we looked at raw materials, or if we're looking for a specific batch, let's say something happens. And again, going back to MOCRA, where, there are other industries like medical devices, where as soon as there is an adverse event, depending on what it is, we have to make sure there's an NCR. Sometimes we have to make reports to the FDA. In cosmetics, it wasn't like that. But now with MOCRA, there's a lot that is actually coming into the cosmetic industry. And so,
and for our audience, NCR,
non-conformance report.
Okay.
Yeah. And so please stop me if I do that. I'm trying.
We do it. We do it at all of our companies. Absolutely. No.
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, coming from medical devices, it's very different. And now I see a lot of that trickling over into cosmetics. And luckily, with the technological advancements, we can easily go in and just put in a batch code and just pull the information that we're looking for a particular product. That is something that would have taken forever back in the day. And so many changes, but honestly for the better. And even in the way, like Rene mentioned about, for example, on the production bench where you have the cap placement being done, things like that would have had to be done manually a long time ago. And we had to sit there and screw and scan. And even the training to do things like that took forever. So it's allowing us to move forward at a faster pace. It is also ensuring accuracy, which is great. And I think that we're going to get into a space where we're going to be able to produce actually at the speed that is required. Because unfortunately, at this point, there are so many people that want the newest thing. Where right now we have The Ordinary as one of our brands, and that's one of our top sellers at the moment. And so many people are trying to get their hands on, like, for example, our salicylic acid, and they can't because we can't necessarily keep up with it. But with the advancements in technology, we can absolutely get to a place where we can produce at that speed to meet the consumer's demand.
And then Rene, let me go to you in terms of what are some of the top skills that are really needed, right? So now we look at it from an engineering perspective. For those individuals who are looking at career opportunities, what are some of the key skills that are going to be needed, and what's transferable, and what things are really hard skills that are needed to be successful with the Estee Lauder Companies in your role?
Yeah, I think the ability to lead large, complex projects, right? So project management skill is a much needed, and I think it's a skill set that'll ever not be needed, right? And so I know that's what we've been seeing within our organization is how do we kind of build those skills up, and then more specifically, and I think I touched upon this a little bit, but where in my past where I've seen kind of best practices from a project management standpoint, and particularly from kind of a stage gate standpoint, right? So if you think about doing kind of these milestone check-ins through each phase of the project to ensure the viability of the project, and to make sure that as you're going along, you're still meeting whatever the needs are of the business as business needs are shifting. So those are things that we're seeing, and then I guess maybe more from a technology standpoint, AI is big, right? And so we're currently, I think some companies are ahead of others. I know here we're still playing and trying to understand how does AI kind of fit within our supply chain specifically, and how do we best use that to improve the customer experience. The other thing is something that I think some folks have probably seen, but like digital try-on, right? So I just ordered a new pair of sunglasses from a website, and allows you to kind of visually see what they look like beforehand. So, currently Estee Lauder has those capabilities now where essentially take a picture. And so for those of you who are of the faint of heart, this, you might want to prepare yourself for this, because I know I did it. And essentially it takes a snapshot of you and tells you everything that's wrong with you and what product you may need in order to make those corrections on your face. But it's things like that, right? So it's that kind of forward thinking, and how do we best position ourselves for the future and the needs of our customers, right? And so if I'm just thinking more broadly, I'm an engineer, but if I try to put on my marketing hat and just try to think in the future, everyone's looking to do things from a convenience standpoint, right? You can order food through your phone, have it delivered to your door. You can order, obviously Amazon will be there the next day, Uber, right? And so how do we play in a space as a company in order to make the buying experience simpler, easier? Now in some places, some instances that can't be the case, right? So if you're talking about like fragrances, like you're going to want to actually go to the store and smell the fragrances, right? But how do we make that experience different? And how do we leverage technology in those experiences from an automation standpoint? Maybe walking through the store and a robot automatically sprays a scent in the air. And so as you walk through, you smell the scent, and now you're curious as to what that is. And then you go talk to someone about that scent, right? And so how do we incorporate that from a customer experience standpoint? And how do all those things kind of trickle down from a supply chain standpoint to be able to handle the increase in demand and things of that nature? So that's kind of the spaces we're seeing. And also from we have a engineering technology center, which is really our playground. And so that's where we're experimenting with new machines, new processes, and things of that nature. So that's how we're moving in that direction.
And just to mention here, for those of you who are NYBLACKMBA members, we do have exclusive experience at the Mac store in Soho, where we will be having our Mac takeover on February 22nd. So for those of you who's needing to register, we still have some slots available. And we talk about a consumer experience where we talk about understanding flavor, scents, and skin tones. It's a great experience for you, opportunity for you to engage with Mac Cosmetics as we close down and have Mac take over for a second year in a row. So with that being said, I'm always keen to know what are some of your favorite initiatives that you worked on. I know my favorite initiative that I've worked on when I was in CPG and even now in my current role. But Ms. Joyce, let me just start with you. What has been the most favorite initiative product that you have embarked on?
This one is a tough one for me because I don't necessarily feel like I have a favorite just yet. I think I'm enjoying the learning experience more than anything. So again, with so many changes coming about, I'm having to kind of rewire my mind, because I remember first coming to Estee Lauder and at that time I was coming from a software company, and I had to restructure my mind and think, wait a minute, it's cosmetics. Nobody's going to die. Don't panic. Don't panic. And so in having my mind be restructured, I'm now learning to, for example, with Mokra and Caesar, as we mentioned, to alter my way of thinking, to still be, of course, on high alert and being aware that things are, still of a certain level of risk. And so not that I have one single favorite, but I'm enjoying the entire process of just the way the industry is evolving. And that in itself is like a huge initiative for me. And that is what I'm loving at the moment.
And I go to you, Rene.
Yeah, say something similar. So, I think for me as a man, the beauty industry was like super new, right? So like Akina, I came from medical devices, and then prior to that, confectionery goods, right? So in those spaces, it's a bit more intuitive, right? A syringe, I know what those syringes are for, and you talk about, diabetes care and things of that nature, right? That's intuitive, right? I know what a Snickers bar tastes like. I know what M&Ms taste like. I know what's popular amongst folks and what's not popular, right? And so when it's intuitive in those spaces, I can challenge a bit more, right? So I remember the days working with Mars Confectionery, and marketing would say, hey, Walmart wants $10 million of a Snickers in the shape of a pumpkin, and the caramel.
That sounds like me.
Yeah.
That sounds like me coming to you and saying that.
Yeah. So we want the caramel to taste like candy corn, right? And so I would say, well, okay, Snickers is popular, but we sold something in like that 3 years ago and it only had a 60% sell through. So tell me how this is going to be different, right? So that's intuitive, right? So in the beauty industry, I'm learning like what brands are catering towards, you know, a younger audience and what's popular and that sort of thing. And so that's a huge learning curve that I am enjoying, because it challenges me to be able to understand intuitively what our customers are doing, even though I'm not customer facing, right? It's important for me to understand what our customer needs are globally, right? And so you think about certain markets where, like, for one of the questions asked is like, why are we producing so many of these different shades? And this particular shade is only, you know, less than 1%, right? And it's like, well, in particular markets, Southeast Asia, right, where in certain parts of the continent, right, sub-Saharan Africa, you have skin shades that are very different, and they're only buying those particular skin shades, right? And so we still need to be, from a manufacturing standpoint, if I'm putting on my continuous improvement lens on, I'm thinking, okay, how do we rationalize, right? You brought up rationalization from a packaging standpoint, from a product standpoint, right? So you can't just go in with a hack, machete and just start hacking away. You have to be sensitive to different markets globally where that might be the only Estee Lauder Companies product that they're buying in that market, right? Because of a particular skin tones and things of that nature. So all of those learnings is very interesting for me because I've never had to think that enterprise-wide way in that way from a marketing standpoint. But as far as like my favorite initiative, I don't know. It's a favorite for me because of the challenge, but it's a headache, and Akina can attest to this. But the CSAR guidelines and she's shaking her head. So the CSAR project for me, from an engineering and infrastructure standpoint, was interesting because, or my favorite initiative, because what I found was that due to the speed that we needed to move with in order to meet these new Chinese regulations, there's a certain calm and comfort that comes with that because you know you're going to make mistakes just due to the speed that you have to move with. So it's just prepping the business to say, hey, one, we're going to make a bunch of mistakes, right? So you need to be okay with that. Two, we need to understand that there are some investments that we're going to need to make that maybe in a couple of years, it's a sunken cost, right? Because we need to meet these regulations in order to insulate ourselves from any liability from an audit standpoint. And the company needs to be okay with the fact that we may be over investing and then essentially redesigning our factories in a master planning sessions, a couple of years from now, right? So it's kind of moving with that speed kind of allowed me to have a bit more confidence, and also allowed me to push the business to make decisions, right? And so that was a fun initiative, and it was an initiative that was unlike any other that ELC had embarked on. And so for me, that was a significant initiative for me that brought along a lot of learnings, right? From a quality standpoint as well.
Let me transition here while we have some time here to some of the questions. We have Felicia Glover who asks us a question to Rene. When you applied to the Estee Lauder Companies from medical devices, what were some of your transferable skills that you identified? This is always a hot button question as individuals are looking to go from one industry to another. Can you just touch on that?
Yeah. So I touched on it a little bit with CSAR, right? And having to elevate our manufacturing sites from just a kind of typical manufacturing site to kind of clean room or clean standards, or essentially to medical device standards and food industry standards. So some of that experience definitely transferred over. And I think Akina touched upon it a little bit too, when you have some of these issues that pop up where you have to do CAPAs as a result of, or to prevent recalls with the FDA. Some of those things kind of transfer over. I think something that transferred over from medical devices for me, and particularly my role. So my role with Becton Dickinson was really more supply chain optimization and continuous improvement, right? So from an end-to-end supply chain, how do we look at our network and identify opportunities for waste and continuous improvement? And that's everything from our manufacturing sites all the way through the customers, right? So when we're thinking about multi-sourcing, right, I touched upon it from a manufacturing standpoint. How do we best position ourselves to multi-source products out of our manufacturing sites? That's something that I learned working at Becton Dickinson, right? And so how do we improve costs by not shipping from California to, Mount Sinai, New York, right? So how do we leverage using our closer distribution centers and things of that nature? And so thinking about things from a network design standpoint, which is a lot of the work that I did, allows me to bring some of those skill sets and that really more of the thinking that comes with that. So I think at the level that Akina are at now in our careers, we're thinking a bit more strategically as opposed to tactically. And so it's about thinking ahead and understanding what will the needs be and what experiences I had previously from a network design standpoint that I can now implement here at Estee Lauder with similar challenges.
And again, let me just ask you this as well. This kind of leans to piggyback off of Renee's comments here. What are some of the best advice and lessons you received where you were in your career and it was like the driving force of pushing you to grow, right? So you traditionally did not come from this industry. And I always find that to be very insightful and enlightening that individuals can just transition to different industries. But what was that? What was that moment? Or what was that advice? Or what was that lesson that allowed you not only to pivot, but ultimately to thrive?
So my story is a little close to my heart. As you saw in my bio, lovely introduction, I have a background in dentistry. So I grew up thinking, you know what, I'm going to study teeth. I knew I wanted to help people. I knew that, I had this fascination for teeth. I grew up saying, and if someone had a gap, I'd say, oh, that girl has a diastema. Like I was that kid. I was 100% set on dentistry being my life. And I got into it and I was disgusted. And so even though I liked, helping everyone and the science behind it was great, once I actually got in with a patient, I knew that it was not for me. And at that point, I really had to recenter myself and think about the tools that I'd already acquired and things that I naturally had. So at that point, that's when I went back and I started studying for health service administration because, again, I love, to help people. So I know I wanted to be in the healthcare system because all of my biology and all that stuff had to be, that money cannot be wasted. And so, again, going back through and just assessing myself and saying, okay, for some reason, I think I have a knack for continuous improvement. I'm that person that will literally say, okay, and don't tell my husband if anyone knows him. If he is making breakfast, it would take him 20 minutes where it would take me 10 because I'm thinking, okay, if I toast the bread now and I crack the egg and I mix it while it's toasting, then I can cut about half the time off. That is just the way that I naturally think. And so realizing those things about myself and utilizing the tools that I already had, I ended up in a place where I was in a dental medical device facility that then, I'm still, working on crowns, but I'm still keeping my eyes open and paying attention to the fact that there are certain processes that weren't going as efficiently as they should have. And so in doing that, I had additional conversations and I then was like, wait a minute, I have an idea. And I just, I was willing to just raise my hand and give that suggestion. And so in giving that suggestion, the quality assurance manager at the time said, hey, do you have any background in technical writing? I didn't, but I went and I got the certification and I made sure that the next time something was needed, I was ready to make sure I could write. Then we went into being able to have audit preparedness. And I just kept learning these little things. And I realized, okay, I have a natural knack for this. I already have this background. How can I merge that? So then I worked my way up into quality control and then from quality control to quality assurance and then regulatory affairs. And I went back and I was like, okay, there has to be something that is more connected to this. So then I went out and I started consulting. Now, these companies that were asking for my help, they knew that, I was more so a dentist, not really, and a quality affairs person. And they appreciated my specific point of view because I came from something that was very much, oh my gosh, we don't want anyone to get hurt, to looking at things like, I worked for a company where they manufactured I called it a glorified pill dispenser. And so it brought together so many aspects of healthcare, and like pharmaceutical work, some software. And there was so much fun. And I was very surprised when they offered me the position to actually work with them. And it's not until I got into it that I realized that so many of the things that I needed to do that job came from myself. And so that's why I say it's such a personal journey, because I wasn't sure for a while what would happen. And I kind of just, I listened to myself. I got to do the work personally. I used everything that I had, the bio and the chem, and I made sure that I could do something with it. And then it kind of just worked out. So even in, coming from medical devices and then now transferring a lot of those like technical writing skills, my Lean Six Sigma, all that stuff into what I have now, it has really been a roller coaster, to be honest with you guys. I didn't see that coming at all. However, the biggest thing that I will always say to anyone that is looking to make a change or they have an interest in something, look to yourself. That is the biggest thing that I will ever say. Look to yourself.
Always say God doesn't waste anything.
Talk about it.
Every experience is unique to that person's DNA. And what you two have outlined here is not only the inspiration, but also the hard skills that are needed, right? So when we look at staying true to yourself, the soft skills, and the motivation, but the hard skills that came along on the journey. And for those of you who are looking to explore career opportunities with the Estee Lauder Companies, I recommend that you apply. We'll go ahead and get that information out to you. There are a number of positions that may apply to you in your current career. We want you to take advantage of that, of course. We want to make sure that you are equipped and prepared, but ultimately we want you to go ahead and take that step and apply for these great career opportunities with the Estee Lauder Companies. Before we leave here, on that note, I want to know, when we look at, and this, I'll give this for both of you, milestones. Both of you are very young in your careers and doing extraordinary things. And you talked about the learning process and ultimately your projects and ultimately not having a favorite. But what are some of the things in the next maybe 3 years you're looking to accomplish personally and ultimately professionally? Personally, from a skills or accomplishment perspective, but ultimately in the industry. Both of you connect, mentor, are involved in your community. So what are some of those two things that you're looking to do? I'll first start with Rene.
Yeah, so I'll start with professionally. For me, I mentioned before the kind of learning curve in the beauty industry, and so I'm still not there yet from a learning standpoint. So what I want to be able to master is be able to understand kind of the beauty industry from a customer standpoint, with the same level of confidence and intuitiveness that I did medical devices and confectionery. So for me, that's a development area for myself within within the beauty industry, and particularly Estee Lauder, right? Because now I have the background of how the sausage is made, which is kind of a good foundation, right? And so how can I leverage that now through other functional areas within the organization? And so for me, I think the next step is really from a career development standpoint is understanding the industry a bit more intimately. And so I've been networking with folks, within Estee Lauder to understand those different spaces. And then personally, I'm a huge advocate and I have a passion for kind of creating spaces and communities, particularly spaces and communities for Black professionals. And so I'm heavily involved with the Black Employee Resource Group of New York City, and leveraging that community and how can we best utilize each other, both from a personal professional development standpoint, but also from a business partnership standpoint, right? So what value can I bring to Estee Lauder by partnering with my network at Google or Nike or the NBA, right? And so how do we leverage those, right? And so where folks may not see those synergies, those synergies do exist. So how can we bring a unique experience or add value? And so I know through our leadership, we've been encouraged to innovate, not necessarily innovate within our kind of technical structure, but innovate outside of that. And how do we bring those ideas to the right folks? And how do we encourage folks to bring those ideas to the table that don't necessarily fall within their marketing function or the engineering function, right? And so I have a passion for kind of creating spaces and building networks and that sort of thing to allow people to interact and level up, or essentially. So yeah, those are kind of my passions and my next milestones, I guess, personally and professionally for the next couple of years.
Anything to you too?
So professionally, it absolutely aligns with you, Rene. I am looking to expand my horizons, just like I did coming from dentistry and going into medical devices and dabbling in several different regulatory affairs type of industries. I would like to expand just a little bit more. I'm not entirely sure of specifically what that looks like, because again, so many things interest me, and I'm just looking forward to utilizing the things that I have already attained and just developing those things, and hopefully, maybe one day I'll, elevate or level up, like Rene mentioned. Personally, I am someone that is very involved with the youth. I partner with several organizations, whether it's educational. I literally just did a speech for one of the schools in my community, PS 57, I believe it was, where we just came and we spoke to the kids, and these are elementary kids, and everyone kind of is taught that you should go to be a doctor, you should go and be a lawyer, you should be a nurse. And while that is true, we do need those professionals. I think I like to bring awareness to the other aspects of what it looks like to be a successful business person. For me, my passion is with women. Many of the young women in my community, unfortunately, they aren't aware of things like quality affairs and regulatory work. Anytime I tell someone what I do, they're like, oh, that actually makes sense, but they didn't know that it was something that existed. And so again, I am always striving to inform and, again, create safe spaces where Black professional women can come together and just discuss the things that they're maybe facing, whether it's imposter syndrome, or, they want to make a change and they're not sure as to, how to actually make that change. So I started with a group of just 3 of us, and now we're up to 10. And we're just having these monthly conversations about the things that we're facing, just little things that, sometimes you can feel alone in the industry, as we are a smaller or minority in the corporate space. And so it's very, very important to not only see yourself in others, which is something that I am always striving to do with my youths, but just having conversations about the day-to-day little things that maybe someone of another ethnicity may not understand, in terms of the expectations. Like when I enter a room, I'm already thinking in my head, okay, well, they're expecting me to be this way or that way. And it's not true. So again, I'm someone that is always very vocal in sharing with the younger generation in particular, how to navigate a lot of these spaces. And I hope to do that and have my small group of 10 expand to 100 if God sees fit.
And, with that said, I want to just personally just thank both of you for not only your time, but for sharing not only your journey, but what really success looks like. Success looks like perseverance. It looks like a path that may not be straightforward, right? But it takes you on a journey where you're able to apply the skills, the talents, the abilities, and the connections that you have in order to continue to build and continue to meet the milestones that are important to you. So on behalf of the National Black MBA Metro New York chapter, our executive team, we thank you so much for your time. Rene, LaBorde, Akina, George, thank you so much. We thank you so much for your time. I also want to thank Caitlin, Christina, Brittany, Alex, Joanne, Dora, Matt, and the entire team at the Estee Lauder Companies for putting this together for us. We want to thank you so much for joining us. Again, February 22nd, we will be at the MAC store for our MAC takeover in Soho. So please register for that while their space is available. MAC Cosmetics will be a part of our Up Mixer, which is going to be at the Hard Rock Cafe, the Hard Rock Hotel, which is in Times Square, which is going to be an extraordinary time to celebrate Black History Month. And we are part of Fashion Week as well. In addition to that, Estee Lauder Companies will be part of our February 15th virtual career fair, premium virtual career fair, which is going to be 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern. So thank you so much. My name is Norville Barrington. I serve as the chapter president of Metro New York Chapter National Black MBA. If you have any questions, if you are interested in applying for roles at Estee Lauder Companies, please email resumes at nyblackmba.org. We will get your resumes to the talent acquisition teams. Again, resumes at nyblackmba.org. On behalf of our team, thank you for your time and enjoy this Black History Month. Have a wonderful evening.